be a sponge, and then bring the juice.
By focusing on your improvement, by focusing on your progress, and eliminating any fixed mindset that you may have and acts of perfectionism, then you encourage your own mastery.
On some level, we do what we want to do 24 hours a day. Now, sometimes it may not seem like that, but if I'm choosing to work instead of sleep, what I'm actually saying is keeping my job is more important than sleeping.
I'm tired of this. I'm tired of getting beat. What can I do to get over this hump? So mentally, that's when I kind of put that forefront, like, hey, it's either all or nothing.
I like to put failure in quotations because I don't believe that failure is true failure if you're looking at it with the right mindset.
The truth is, the journey to greatness is hard. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes focus, and every day you have to decide what you value, what you want to pursue, and what you want to achieve. And if you dig deep enough, if you push hard enough, we all have what it takes to be great. Welcome to the Edge of Greatness. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Edge of Greatness podcast. I'm your host, Charles Schultz, and today I have with me a very special guest, Alan Stein Jr., keynote speaker, performance and leadership coach, author of Raise Your Game. Thank you so much for taking time to join me today.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure. I'm looking forward to a fun conversation.
Awesome. I know you're a big comedy guy. I know you like to laugh and have a good time. So I want to know, to start today off, what's something that you've watched or heard or listened to that made you like belly laugh, like get after it laughing?
You know, what's funny is actually just before I jumped on here with you, I was watching a couple clips from Bill Burr, who is one of my favorite comedians. For some reason, I'm heavily attracted to darker humor, to very politically incorrect humor. For some reason, that is the stuff that really gets me to belly laugh. Whether it's a scene from a movie like Superbad or 40-Year-Old Virgin, or whether it's somebody like Bill Burr. That's the stuff that really gets me. And out of respect to your listening audience and to preserve my career, I won't repeat the things that really make me laugh, like what I was just listening to Bill Burr, because I do recognize that most people find it somewhat offensive because it is politically incorrect. But that's usually the stuff that gets me. And it really started with George Carlin, who I still consider on the Mount Rushmore of stand-up comedians of all time. And, he had kind of a subtle anger to him that I just found funny. Like, he found most of what was going on in humanity somewhat irritating and annoying. And I just found it very funny. And I've always kind of gravitated towards that.
Yeah, I think there's some value in finding humor in the dark, finding humor in the tough, finding humor in the things that don't go well. It allows you kind of to almost shrug it off, and move forward. So,
yeah. But, I will say this, if I had to say who my favorite comedians are now, Louis C.K., and I realize, what he went through a few years ago with the Me Too movement, he immediately is a turnoff to many people, but Louis C.K., Dave Chappelle, might be in the conversation as the greatest of all time. As I said, Bill Burr, Daniel Tosh. But if you can look past some of the things that they say that are darker, a little more politically incorrect and potentially offensive, these guys are incredibly observant, and they really make you think. And to me, that's the sign of a good stand-up comedian, but it's also the sign of a good author or a speaker. Whether or not you agree with the content of what they're saying is almost irrelevant, but they should get you to hopefully at least approach looking at things through a different lens. And I work hard when I'm studying, whether it's somebody in hip hop or somebody in stand-up comedy, to kind of be able to separate the actual content from the craft and the skill of what they do. Another perfect example is Eminem. I certainly don't condone or support a good portion of his lyrical content, especially in his heyday. But I've always been fascinated with his gift of the command of the English language, of his ability to flow, of his ability to paint imagery. So I can find value and enjoy listening and watching people that I don't necessarily agree with all of the time. And I think that's, an important way to approach life.
Yeah, no, I've noticed a lot about your willingness, and you mentioned it in your answer, to think. And something that is valuable about what you bring is that I feel like you're willing to rethink what you're doing, to look at things from a different lens. I mentioned before we got on that I listened to a few of your podcast episodes where you guys went back and forth about different topics, and you guys didn't necessarily see eye to eye, but you were open to a discussion about trying something different. Where does that come from for you? Where does this openness to challenge the way you see the world and be okay with going, well, that's different, I might be able to try that? Where does that come from for you?
I think the main impetus happened about 5 or 6 years ago. So I'm in my mid 40s now. And when I hit the 40-year mark, which I think I'm not unique in this regard, when you kind of hit that midlife, you start to reevaluate things. You start to hopefully become more introspective and really look at yourself and the patterns of behavior and the thought processes that you've had, let's just say for the first half of your life, as maybe now you're entering into the second half. And that was something I really took seriously. And I really started to take a look at every single belief system that I had, every single habit, every pattern that I've created, and started to ask is, first of all, from a belief standpoint, why do I believe this? And I found that my answer to many of these things were, well, that's just what I was taught when I was younger. And I didn't really like that answer. I believe in being a free thinker, and I want to form my own opinions on a variety of different topics. And, so when I started uncovering some of these things, whether it was views on religion, views on politics, views on anything, I didn't like the answers that I was coming up with, which was just, this is what I was told, and I've just kind of followed blindly. So I started uncovering a lot of these different things, but I also started looking at some of my habits and behaviors. And the reason that I'm working towards becoming much more open-minded, much more open to hearing other people's points of view, trying to listen with a genuine curiosity and fascination, as opposed to listening with a rigid bias and preconceived notions. The reason I'm doing that now is because most of my life I didn't do that. Most of my life I have been very opinionated, very judgmental, very stubborn, very rigid in grasping my beliefs. And whether it was a belief on the best way to train a basketball player or a belief on kind of the worldview at large, I kind of dug my heels in and I realized that wasn't getting me anywhere, that it wasn't leading to a higher level of consciousness or a higher level of happiness or fulfillment. So I've been trying to unlearn that and just say, hey, I'm open to hearing anyone's perspective or point of view on anything. And I'll judge what they say simply based on the merit of what they share. And, and this is incredibly difficult to do, especially on social media, where everything is so emotionally charged that it's really hard to have an opinion on anything and share it openly without people attacking you or taking it out of context. And, but I'm working on the skill set of that openness. And whether it's something like to wear a mask or not wear a mask, to be vaccinated or not be vaccinated, to do this or to do that, I try to listen to both sides and then form my own opinions, as opposed to just diving in heavily on one side and kind of, closing myself off to what anyone else has to share. And I found that when you go through life with a genuine curiosity and fascination, you can learn a lot. You can learn a lot about yourself, but you can learn a lot about the world at large. And I also think it's an important tool for connection. You and I are just formally meeting right now. I have no idea what your belief system is on a variety of different topics, but I'd be very open to learning it. And even if you believe something that vehemently opposes what I believe, I'm okay with that. And the reason that I'm okay with that is I don't think there are very many truths in this world. I think most of what we deal with are beliefs and opinions. They're not facts. And I would find that I've spent most of my life coming from a very arrogant point of view that my belief is somehow better than your belief, or that my opinion is more valuable than your opinion. And I simply want to rid myself of that. You have every right to believe what you believe, and you probably have just as much reason to believe it as I'd like to believe that I have on the things that I, hold so dearly. So this has been a process over the last few years. Certainly, I'm not anywhere close to being done. This will be something I'll work on for the rest of my life.
Yeah. I love the openness and the transparency there, because I think a lot of people see you now and they probably assume this is how you've always been, this openness, this willingness to learn. And I like the fact that you mentioned that it wasn't always that way, because I feel like I'm kind of in a similar boat where I was an athlete in college. I was pretty dug in my ways. I was pretty like, you know what, you don't know what I'm doing through or what I'm doing. So you just stay over there. And I'm trying to become better about that. And I love the communication of the podcast for me personally, because it allows for that back and forth. Because you said you try to put it out there on social media and it gets taken out of context. This platform and the communication piece that you mentioned and going back and forth gives us an ability to expand upon, okay, well, tell me more why you believe that. Why do you feel that way? With all of this going on, how has this changed or sparked your curiosity? Like with the new approach to looking at things from a different lens and to having a view of things like, oh, well, I'm interested. Let's hear what you have to say. Okay, that's different than what I thought. How has that helped you become like more curious, or has it changed the way you look at the answers that you seek?
I try to start with curiosity and I try to start with fascination. So let's just say we pulled any topic out of a hat and you and I were going to either discuss it or debate it. And if I found out immediately that your view of something drastically opposed my view, instead of leaning in with judgment or trying to take a small snapshot of the very limited information that I'd have of what I know about you, or trying to convince you that I'm right or try to undermine what you believe, none of those things increase connection or increase my ability to learn. Instead, I try to lean in with a fascination and go, wow, that is really interesting that Charles believes something completely different than I do. Both of us are human beings walking this earth, yet his experiences in life and the things that he's been educated on has led him to a different conclusion than what I've come up with. That really fascinates me. I'm intrigued. I'm genuinely interested in how you could think something so differently than what I think. And I'm ridding myself of any type of self-righteousness. This has nothing to do with, well, I'm right and he's wrong, or I'm good and he's bad. It's all a level playing field. And the beliefs that I now have, they're just the right fit for me. I would never in a million years tell someone that what I believe is right, that it's correct, that it's better. It just simply works with my philosophy and perspective of the world. But all of these things are open for change. And that's the other reason that I want to be incredibly curious is if you have some information or perspective that I'm not privy to, and I can learn that, and it actually gets me to change my mind and actually puts me on a higher path or can start getting better results, I'd be incredibly foolish not to be open to that. So to me, the fascination is, I can't believe this person believes this, or I can't believe this person says this. I want to dig a little deeper just to find out why. And, once again, we're coming on the heels of a year. These past 18 months with the pandemic have been fascinating to say the least. Whether you talk about something politically, you talk about the social unrest, you talk about obviously the actual global pandemic and how to resolve that. All of these things have been positioned to be very, very polarizing. You're either with me or you're against me, and I don't want to go through life like that. I have friends and colleagues that I respect and adore immensely that have very differing perspectives on those three things that I just mentioned to you. And I'm okay with that. I don't let that get in the way of our friendship. If anything, I try to learn as much as I can from them. And, I think I'm certainly no expert debater by any means, but I think in order to be a free thinker and to actually be able to have intelligent conversations and to be good at the art of debate, you have to learn just as much about the other side and the other perspective as you know about your own, so that you can discuss it, intelligently. And these are things I'm trying to work on. So I intentionally listen to podcasts and read books and do things with people that I know have a viewpoint that challenges my own, that might even be the exact opposite of my own, But I want to do that again, leaning in with this curiosity and this fascination.
You mentioned something very interesting there, and I agree. There's a big polarization in the world right now, and it's either way over here or way over there, and there's no coming together or communicating. Have you found this to be a challenge for you with the companies that you work with to help them understand how to work together as a team? Has there been a shift over the last 18 months with all this going on from people who may have been a decent team to now they're finding that they're divided and they have to come back together? Is that something you've had to deal with?
Well, it's my belief and interpretation that it's actually just a perception that we're this divided, because I think it's the loudest 5% on either end of the spectrum that make all of the headlines and that are doing all of the yelling on social media. I think on on most topics, we actually have more things in common, generally speaking, society as a whole, than we do on the opposites. But, depending on which news channel you choose to watch, and I choose to not watch any of them, depending on who you follow on social, and I've drastically cut down my consumption of social, depending on who you listen to from a podcast or a video standpoint, it can make it seem like, well, the entire world agrees with me and the entire world thinks what I think. So anyone that opposes that is an idiot. And I don't believe that. I think they're actually very small minorities that are that polarized. The rest of us can and should have an intelligent conversation. Once again, whether it's on a political issue, on the pandemic, on the social unrest, is be able to say, okay, here are some of my thoughts and feelings about this. I'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings about this. Let's find some common ground that we agree on, but let's respectfully and with great civility discuss the things that we disagree on. And sometimes, at the end of the day, you just have to say, hey, we just don't agree on this. And that's okay. Not everybody agrees on what's, the best movie of all time or the best artist of all time, or, not everyone would agree that they even like my shirt right now. Someone might say, I don't like V-necks. I like regular cut t-shirts. Okay, well, that's okay. We're allowed to have differences. I don't know why we've somehow positioned things to think that difference of opinion is a bad thing. So to answer your question, these are the things I encourage with teams. I encourage diversity at every level. I know that right now, when we hear the word diversity, most people immediately think of race or they think of age, but diversity of thought is incredibly important. And if I was building a team, I would want to pull in team members that have a wide range of backgrounds, experiences, race, gender, ethnicity, a diversity of thought, because I'd want as many different perspectives as possible. So to me, kind of all of these things I'm sharing with you are what I share with the groups that I work with, and tell them to keep encouraging that. And that when someone on your team disagrees with you, that's a gift. That gives you guys an opportunity to look and work together for a better way. If everyone on your team is thinking alike, then someone's not thinking. And that's not an Alan Stein Jr. original quote. That's something I picked up many years ago, but I really believe that. So I try to let folks know that it's okay to have a difference of opinion, but you have to learn how to communicate that with civility and respect. And this whole concept of, instead of judging someone, be curious to why they believe what they believe. And one of the best tools for any of these things is just the ability to listen. So a good portion of what I talk about with teams is just the ability to listen. And I know that I'm doing the opposite of that now. I'm monopolizing our airtime and I'm doing most of the talking. But outside of me being a guest on someone else's show, I try to make sure that most of my interactions with people are doing what you're doing a brilliant job of right now, which is just listening. When I have a pre-event call with one of my clients that I'm going to speak to, they speak 90% of the time. And the only stuff I do is what you're doing so well right now, is just asking insightful questions that gets them to open up more. And if I'm having a discussion with someone that I disagree with, I try to let them do most of the talking, as opposed to me trying to convince them that I'm right. And like I said before, I still have a lot of work to do in this area. There are still times where I get emotionally charged and I try to convince someone, but I've now got an awareness where I catch myself doing that, and I can take a step back and go, okay, that's a behavior of the old Alan. You need to let it go, take a deep breath, and now genuinely be interested in listening what this other person has to say. So these are all concepts that I try to share with folks that I work with now at the corporate level.
So you said you have a better awareness now of when you're starting to almost become the old Alan. Is there something or a trigger that kind of sets that off? Or how do you recognize, or for somebody who's maybe trying to make changes to grow, because anyone who's on the pursuit of excellence, who's trying to achieve a higher level, there's always going to be changes that need to be made. So how do we start to recognize where our flaws are or where we are falling short and make some of those adjustments so that we can become better?
Well, it starts with what you just said. First of all, is you need to work on your self-awareness. And for me, self-awareness certainly is going to be in tune with the things that I believe I do well. You know, where are my natural strengths and my gifts? What are my dreams and my ambitions? Most people they coin that the good stuff. And I'm intentionally saying that with air quotes, because I don't believe that this stuff is good or bad, but just for reference for your listeners, that's usually the stuff people consider good and positive. But it's also having the courage and humility to look on the other side of the curtain and be able to openly acknowledge, what are my shortcomings? What are my flaws? Where are my weaknesses? Where are my best opportunities for growth? What are my biggest fears? What are my biggest insecurities? And that's what most people would label the bad stuff or the negative stuff. But I don't look at it that way. I think it's, you need to put equal importance on both. And many times, in order to see things accurately and to make an accurate self-evaluation, you need the help of others. You can't see your own blind spots. That's why they're called blind spots. But if you can recruit somebody that cares about you and knows you well, they can help you see these things. They can help you say, Alan, you often get emotionally charged during an argument or a disagreement, and you kind of dominate the conversation. You're not a very good listener. And that's something I've had several people tell me, several years ago when I really started to do this work. And that was really helpful because I couldn't see that in the way that I was looking at the world. So I think it's important to have people help you see that side. And then it's a way of managing both sides is, how do I amplify and lean into my natural strengths, and put more of that out into the world, and which of these weaknesses deserve my attention that I can work on to improve? Where are my biggest opportunities for growth? How can I get better in these areas? So once you have kind of this evaluation and all right, here's some of the things I really need to work on, then moving forward, what's most important to me is just learning how to be in the present moment. When you don't let your mind wander to the things of the past and you don't let it wander to the future, both of which are really hypothetical constructs that we've made up in language. I mean, you can never be in your past and you can never be in your future other than your thoughts. Now, your thoughts can be in either place, but you can't. The only place you can ever be is in the present moment. So I try to align my mind and my body and my heart to be in the present moment as often as possible and as consistently as possible. And that's arguably my biggest challenge every day, is being present, because it is so easy for me to get distracted by something that happened yesterday or a month ago. And it's equally easy to get anxious or worried about something that may happen in the future. But again, I can't do anything about those. You can't change the past. Now, you can change your relationship and your thoughts on the past. You can look back on something that you thought was one of the worst things to ever happen to you, and you can actually say, you know what? Now with some introspection, that was one of the best things that ever happened to me because it's put me on a new path. So the facts of the event haven't changed, but my thoughts and my relationship with those facts have now changed. And then on the future end, the future is 100% hypothetical. It always has been. The future has always been uncertain. People throw that word around right now a lot with the pandemic, makes that things are so uncertain. It's like the future has always been uncertain. I've never known what's going to happen 10 minutes from now, what's going to happen 10 days from now, or 10 years from now. And learning how to have some type of acceptance and peace with knowing that you don't know what's going to happen has been really helpful. So there's nothing wrong with learning from the past. There's nothing wrong with preparing for the future, but I try not to live in either one of those spaces, and I try to be present. And if I'm present and I'm aware of the pitfalls that I've fallen to previously and behaviors that I'm looking to change, they come up with great clarity. And usually within a matter of seconds, if not a matter of minutes, I can find myself quickly a trigger to say, all right, you're doing that again, Alan. Here you go. You're and then I can start to make some conscious change. So to me, it's all about having an accurate evaluation with self-awareness, coupling that with learning to be in the present moment, and you'll get tremendous clarity. You'll catch yourself immediately when you start doing things that don't serve you.
Yeah, one of the things I've been working on is being more present, and for this purpose, with the conversations we're having, I used to talk to people and then they would say something and I would start thinking of my next question and I'd miss nuggets, and it would be big nuggets that I could have used for another question or to go a different direction. And so, for me, being present and listening and actively paying attention and trying to think, okay, well, that was interesting. What's more about that? And it's funny because it's made the conversations better, but it's also made it challenging because there are things that were said early on that I was like, ooh, that's interesting. And then the conversation goes and I go, I forgot what was interesting. Now what do I do? But I've also found that by doing it this way, I've been able to open up doors to a better flow of the conversation. And that stuff that I was thinking about before wasn't as important. And that's why I forgot it. So I agree. I think for me, the active listening and the really being present is challenging for me. One, because my mind is always going like super fast in multiple directions, trying to take on everything at once, and centering myself is a challenge. So what I want to do is I want to actually shift to something you posted recently. You just did the last man standing race. And for me, I think that's such a good transition, because in a race that has no end, you have to be present, right? You have to know where you're at currently, because you can't look for an ending. You have to just keep going and tell yourself you've got more. So talk to me a little bit about that race, because I find it very fascinating to think that you could potentially run a race that has no end in sight and still maintain a confident and positive outlook on things. And I think this translates really well to the world, because, we don't know where the end is. We have to just keep running our race. And so tell me a little bit about that experience.
Absolutely. I don't know how familiar you are with Simon Sinek's work, but in particular, his most recent book, The Infinite Game. I'm a huge fan of Simon and love that most recent book. And really I guess the ultimate premise of the book is, in certain things like sports, like basketball, which is where I've spent most of my career, basketball is a finite game. We've all agreed that the team with the most points when the final buzzer goes off will be declared the winner. And we all know how much time will elapse until that final buzzer will go off. So it's crystal clear who your team is, who the opponent is, what the rules are, and who will be deemed the winner. And that is a finite game. The rest of it, business, life, everything else at large, is what Simon calls an infinite game, which is, it's not as clear cut. People always talk about winning in business, but what does that really mean? I might ask you and your answer might be different than what my answer is. And we could be working for the same company. So it's not as clear. It's an infinite game, which means it's more evergreen, which means we need to work more on kind of the daily improvement and daily behavior so that we can continue to level up and grow, but know that that's going to ebb and flow. And that was one of the things that's so fascinating about this Last Man Standing event, is it is kind of an infinite race, I guess, because it's not over until there is literally a last man standing. Now, with that said, race is probably not the best word to describe it, which is how they describe it. And it's the verbiage we use, because it really isn't a race. It's everybody's going out there to do the best they're capable of and run their race. And then you just kind of have to see where the chips fall. Now, through the experience of having run it before, I was pretty sure that it was going to take someone running close to 150 miles to actually be the winner. And not that I'm trying to put limitations on myself, but I know based on some previous experiences and based on the current level of fitness that I had, that was not going to be me. So I was not worried about actually being the last man standing. I was going to run my race and say, okay, what am I capable of mentally and physically? How can I push myself, and how far can I run? So I immediately removed any type of external pressure of trying to win, of trying to be better than someone else. And the hardest part of that was, since I had done it last year, was I was even trying to remove the expectation that I was going to beat last year's performance. And that was really hard. I mean, I'd be lying to you if I said that I didn't want to beat what I did last year. I mean, who wants to go through a whole year and not have any tangible progress to be able to show? But I really worked hard to detach myself from that, because it was a different day. It was a year later. I was a different person, and I try really hard not to play the comparison game. And if we're going to list things that are really challenging in my life, being present is one of my biggest daily challenges, and not playing the comparison game is really hard to do. And it's something I'm hyper aware of, and yet it's hard to do. So my goal was to detach from any type of preconceived goal or outcome or result, and just go there and do the best I was capable of, give my best effort, have a great attitude, have some fun, and enjoy the process, which for me is really, really important. And wherever the chips fall, that's where they'll fall. And I was able to do that and had a great experience. And, I've already signed up to do it again next year, because it's something I like having on my calendar, kind of this annual mark. And yes, there's this tug of war with myself of saying, all right, well, next year you better beat what you did this year. But that's when I catch myself and say, no, don't worry about that. That's a different time. There's an old saying, and I don't know who came up with this, but it said, a man never walks through the same river twice. And that's because the river is always different and the man is always different. So even if you go through, you're going to walk across the river every single morning it's different. You're a day older, the river is a day older, and it's the same thing. Every time I do this event, it's not the exact same event on a micro level. So all I need to worry about is just doing the best that I'm capable of at that time. And some days I'm much better about that mindset and not playing the comparison game. And other times I am. I mean, once again, in full transparency, I have moments where after that race, I was thinking, man, you should have done better than that. You could have gotten in one more loop. How come you're not as good as this other person over here? This guy's 10 years older than you, and he ran 5 more loops. And, these are thoughts that I don't have control over entering my brain, but I certainly have control over whether or not I listen to them, whether or not I believe them, or whether or not I give them power. So now when I would find myself thinking some of those things that don't serve me, I could just take a deep breath, say, all right, there you go again, Alan. Look at you yourself. You're playing the woulda, coulda, shoulda game, which doesn't do anything to help you. When you're saying should and would, and you're just denying your presence in the moment. And I'm trying to work away from that. So where I feel good about myself in general at this point in time is just having this level of awareness. I got so many things that I want to continue to heighten and improve, but I'm aware of these things now. And that's the first step. Because you're not going to improve anything you're unaware of, and you're not going to improve anything you're oblivious to. And I spent most of my life oblivious to the fact that I was always playing the comparison game. So now I'm trying not to.
It sounds like you've got a pretty good control of your mind at this point, where you can turn off the thoughts that come in. And I think that's such a special thing, because as an athlete, we're all faced with moments where we doubt ourselves, or we have negative thoughts. As a writer, I'm sure there were moments where you were like, man, is this good enough? Is it the best I can do? Should I put it out there? And then when you get in front of teams and groups, there's probably moments that maybe not as often, but early on, I'm sure you had those things. Were there moments where you learned doing these endurance races, how to talk to yourself this way? Or was this something you picked up somewhere else? Because I know you've mentioned before you did, there was like a hill climb race that you did. Was that something that was like an ultra, like 100 times up and down this massive hill? I think I heard you tell the story about, which is kind of an interesting story. But were those things that opened your mind to talking to yourself in a positive way, or were there other moments? Where did that come from?
When I've been on this search, there have been several people that have been incredibly influential into my perspective. And the cool part is I've never met any of these people. I've just devoured their work online. One of them is Eckhart Tolle. One of them is a gentleman named Peter Crone, and one of them is Byron Katie. I'll call her a young lady. I think she's in her late 70s now. But their work, and I have devoured hundreds of hours of their content, both watching on YouTube, listening to podcasts, reading their material. And I want to make sure that I give those 3 people credit, because their perspective has really helped shape and redirect mine. And many of these things that I'm saying to you now have come from things that I've learned from them. And, a lot of it has to do with that self-talk. An important clarification is I still have negative thoughts all of the time. I still have tons of thoughts that don't serve me. The only difference is now I don't accept them as truth, and I can separate myself from my thoughts. And that's really, really important. It's I don't believe these thoughts. I don't give them extra power. I don't speak them into existence, which is really, really important. Byron Katie's work, and she literally calls it the work, is a series of questions that you should ask yourself. And one of the questions, the first question is this true? And this piggybacks on something I said much earlier in our conversation, that I'm under the belief that there are not many truths in this world. There's not many actual facts. Most of these things are our interpretation of them. It's our perception. It's not reality that causes us to feel certain ways. It's our perception of reality, which is why we could name an event that both you and I shared, and you might have a completely different perspective of that event than I did. I mean, we can take the pandemic, for example. Some people are saying this is the worst thing to ever happen to humanity in 1,000 years. And other people are saying this has been one of the best gifts because it's been able to do this, this, and this. It's the same event, but we have different perspectives. So now when I have a negative thought, I should have run more this year than I did last year. I'm embarrassed that I wasn't able to beat this other person. The first question I ask is is this true? Is it factual that I should have been able to run more this year than last year? And to me, the answer to that is no, it's not factual. It's a belief that I have. It's a perception. And beliefs and perceptions, if you're open-minded, are malleable. You can change them. You don't have to be rigid with that. So, using Byron Katie's through her lens is this true? And how do I know that it's true? How can I definitively say that it's true? And just those two questions alone, most things don't even pass that test. They're not truths. So then I just have to say, okay, well, if I don't know that it's true, then I don't have to believe it. Again, this is all internal dialogue. This is not anyone saying anything to me. This is me saying to myself. And I really try and redirect those thoughts. Same thing with the speaking into existence. I try not to say anything out loud that doesn't serve me. Even on that run where we're constantly running this loop, I would, if someone said, Alan, how you feeling? I feel great. Now I wasn't always feeling great, but it doesn't serve me in any way to say, oh my God, I'm tired. Oh my God, I'm thirsty. Oh my God, that doesn't do anything to serve me. So I'm trying to only say things and believe thoughts that are going to serve me. And this goes back to the concept I mentioned earlier, which this is something I learned from Peter Crohn's work, that the future is always hypothetical. It's 100% made up in our mind. Now, you or I might believe we know what tomorrow is going to look like, but that's just something we've made up. It's hypothetical. So if it's going to be hypothetical anyway, why not believe that something good's going to happen? Or why not believe that something that's going to serve me is going to happen? If I'm a basketball player and it's a timeout and there's 3 seconds left and they're going to drop a play for me to take the last shot, none of us know whether the ball is going to go in or not. None of us. It's completely hypothetical. But why don't I believe that it's going to go in and I'm going to hit the shot? If we're going to just start making stuff up, let's make up something that might be in our favor. And it doesn't mean that that's going to happen. But then if I'm not attached to outcomes, then I'm not worried. Whether the ball goes in or the ball doesn't go in, I'm not attaching my happiness, my fulfillment, or my self-worth to that. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen, and I'll deal with it when it does. And those kind of mindsets I found to be incredibly liberating and have really helped me in all of these things. So, as I was running, anytime I found some negative thoughts starting to creep into my mind, like, what are you doing this for? Oh my God, it's, you don't have any more in you. You need to quit. I just chose not to believe them and got to the point where, I was finished, and that was okay. And I was completely at peace with that. And some of the best compliments that I got were some of the people that were kind of around me in my camp that were like, man, how did you just finish and you're still smiling? Like, you seem to be, even though you are physically exhausted, you still seem to be in good spirits. And that's just because I chose to look at it through that lens.
I think that mental approach is such a valuable thing. And I think the great athletes of our time have that confidence and that inner dialogue that says, yeah, I got this. I'm going to do this. I'm curious, do you think people don't maintain that because of a fear of being labeled as like an egotistical person or somebody who's arrogant? Because I think a lot of athletes in particular, this is, I mean, that's where my world is. They get labeled as like cocky or arrogant, or they have such an ego. But I think of it as this is just a confident person in their abilities, and they've put in the work to earn that right to be confident. So how do we help others who maybe lack that confidence and they don't know how to tell themselves, like, you're good enough, you can do this, and not be afraid of that label that might show up?
For me, another area that I've tried to work on is I don't personally place much value on being the best. I place all of my value on being my best. And in certain circumstances, being my best might be good enough to be the best, but it's not what I'm focused on. I just want to give the best effort that I'm capable of, or have the best effort that I'm capable of. And that's really the only parts that are in my control anyway. I don't control how fast or how smart or how of anybody else. So it's to me, it's that lens. And also I think where I can be at peace with this stuff, and this is what I recommend, whether it's someone in athletics or business, is learning to detach from outcomes, learning to detach from needing other people's approval or satisfaction, and enjoy the process and enjoy the work. And that is really hard to do, because if we go back to kind of finite games versus infinite games, basketball is an outcome sport. If you are a coach, you are judged on wins and losses. You are judged on the outcome of the game, but you don't have any control over that. And you don't really have any control over whether somebody likes you or doesn't like you based on your wins or losses. You don't have any control over whether or not your athletic director or your GM fires you based on wins or losses. So for me, all of these things that I don't have control over, I'm just trying to relinquish and just focus on what I can control. And if I can show up every day and give my best attitude, have my best attitude and give my best effort, and just let the chips fall where they may, then I don't worry about outcomes. But I found that in my own experience, that when you do stay focused on the process and you do focus on your own attitude and your own effort, you tend to get many of the outcomes that you would have desired in the first place. Those things just take care of themselves. An example I use all the time, or an analogy I use all the time, is building a brick wall. If you're tasked with building a brick wall, don't worry about the wall. Just worry about laying each brick with as much care and precision as you can. Don't even worry about the second brick. Just worry about the one brick in your hand, and can I set it exactly where it needs to go? And once that's done, now that's in the past. Now I pick up another brick. Can I lay that brick exactly where it needs to go? And if I can stay focused on laying those bricks with intention and purpose, there's a very good chance that wall will just take care of itself. I don't need to worry about it. And that's really what I'm trying to do. And once again, I feel like this whole show is just a list of the things that I find challenging and struggle with, but that's a struggle for me. I mean, this is another trigger that I find all of the time, is almost vying for or needing other people's approval or satisfaction. We can take my book, for example. I already did the part that I have control over, which was writing the best book I was capable of at that time. That's the only part I have control over. Whether or not someone buys it or reads it or rates it or likes it or recommends it is all out of my hands. Now, this doesn't mean that I don't have preferences. I have plenty of preferences. My preference is millions of people buy it, millions of people like it, millions of people recommend it. That is a preference, but I'm not attached to that preference. So if those things don't happen, it doesn't lower my self-worth. It doesn't lower, in my eyes, the work that I put in. I don't let other people determine whether or not that book is good or bad. It was the best I was capable of at that time. And the reason I even say at that time was, I wrote Raise Your Game almost 3 years ago. Certainly, I've evolved and I've learned more now. There are parts of Raise Your Game that if I was writing it right now in this moment would be different, or dare I say, improved upon. But that's always going to be the case. Same thing as a keynote speaker. If I was coming to speak at your company tomorrow, I would do the best I'm capable of at that point in time. But I would hope that 3 years from now, I would look back on that keynote and go, man, I can do that much better now. I'm capable of more now, because that means you're constantly growing and evolving. I've recorded well over 600 podcast episodes in the 3 different shows that I've hosted. I know that if I go back and I listen to those first couple, they're probably not as eloquent or as polished as maybe they are today. But I hope 10 years from now, if I'm still recording podcasts, that the same will be true. So part of it is having an acceptance with, at that time, it was the best I could do. And to me, this whole mindset of detaching from outcomes. I mean, it's okay to have preferences, but don't be attached to the outcomes, and detaching from a need for people's approval is a step towards a more enlightened consciousness. And certainly for me, more inner peace and fulfillment. Not easy to do by any means, not even close to easy to do.
I love that. And I love that answer, because I look back at when I started my podcast, it's almost been a year. We're getting close. And I guarantee I've come such a long way in that 1 year. And again, in 5 years, I hope it's even further. In 10 years, I hope it's even further. And that's how, again, I love that outlook on, this is who I am in the moment, and it's the best I've got to give. And I'm okay with that. And let's go forward and be the best I can be tomorrow. And again, and if you do that every day, you're bound to do some pretty special things. And I think that shows for a lot of people. And I want to go back to your story from when you were at Elon, because I think that's a cool place to come from, because I think you've come such a long way from that point based on the stories I've heard you tell of who you were as a player, how you evolved from, high school to college, to then not being the player that you thought you were going to be in college, to then finding your niche or your niche, or however you want to say it, in the basketball world, and now the leadership stuff. But there's one story that really stood out to me, and I think it was a shift. I don't know if it was a shift for you, but it was a shift for me in your story, is the interview you decided to go to for that first job that you were looking to get a part of with the basketball trainer, where you drove 5 hours for an interview. Can you tell that story real quick for my audience, as far as what your mindset was and what you were trying to accomplish there?
Yeah. So I guess the best way is to give a real Cliff Notes overview for your listeners who aren't familiar. And to do that, basketball has always been my first identifiable passion. I fell in love with the game at 5 years old, and here 40 years later, basketball is still a really important pillar in my life. And, I just devoured the game as a player and as a fan, was a pretty good high school player, good enough to earn a scholarship down at, it was Elon College at the time. It's now Elon University. And while I was in college, I started to develop an equal love for performance training, for improving athleticism, being able to jump higher, making the body more resilient to injury, strength and conditioning and fitness. And I realized that, my strength zone and where I would be happiest and most fulfilled and where I could make the biggest impact upon graduation was combining my original love of the sport of basketball with my newfound love of performance training. And that dot of intersection would be becoming a basketball performance coach or a strength and conditioning coach. So for me, there was no question that was the path I was on, and that was my purpose and what I needed to do. And I realized that one of the best ways to do that would be to learn from someone that was already doing at a high level what I wanted to do. And there was a trainer who lived here in the DC area, which is where I grew up, who was training several really notable NBA players at the time. And this was in the late 90s. So I figured there's no need to go reinvent the wheel. Why don't I just go work for someone that's doing what I want to do? And let me try to learn every single thing that I can from that person. So then I can go out and do the same thing. And, I reached out to him. I mean, at this time, you have to realize late 90s, there was email, but it wasn't the tool that we know it is today. There were cell phones, but they were the old school flip phones. Texting wasn't even available. There were still, by today's standards, pretty archaic means of communication. So most of my communication was simply calling a landline over and over to try to speak to him, and just basically said, look, I've heard from a few people. This is who you are. This is what you do. This is who I am. And this is what I hope to do one day. I would just love to come and be your apprentice, or be your intern, or be your assistant, or be anything that you need me to be. And the exchange will be, if you let me observe and learn from you, I'll do whatever I can do to add value to you. And I felt like that would be a pretty good exchange. And it was. I learned a tremendous amount from him, both in the on the court stuff and in the weight room stuff, as well as off. And I'm really glad that I took that step. I'd certainly like to believe, we've lost touch since then, but I'd like to believe I added value to him as well. So it was a very even exchange, and I only worked for him for just under a year. But in that time, I progressed from someone that was basically just sweeping the floor and folding towels and watching workouts to actually leading warm-ups and taking some players through workouts. So there was a tremendous amount of growth in that year. And I decided at that time it was, time for me to hang up my own shingle and do my own thing. But I'm so thankful for that opportunity. And just that mindset, this is kind of the root of the fascination and curiosity of leaning into that and saying, okay, I don't need to make this up on my own. There are other people that have walked this path that I want to learn from. And, same thing with learning from somebody like an Eckhart Tolle or a Byron Katie or a Peter Crone. They've already jumped through certain hoops that I can learn from, and that can help me advance my level of consciousness and my perspective and philosophy on the world. So there's no need for me to go at this alone now, because we've advanced so much from an information standpoint. Like I said, these three people have been incredibly influential in my life, and I've never met them. They have no idea who I am, but I've been able to devour their work, and it's been able to put me on a better path. So I think that mindset is really, really helpful to have as you're trying to learn and you're trying to grow.
The reason I wanted you to tell that story is I have a gym. I train people. I work with people on a regular. That's my day job. And I had an athlete come in the other day, and their comment to me was, I'm going to ask for a raise. If they pay me more, I would work more hours. And this was literally right after I heard you tell the story of how you were willing to go and drive to meet this guy 5 hours away to work and pick up, trash and sweep the floors and do all this for free. Because I think so often today we find our athletes and our people want to get to the top so fast that they don't understand the journey or the process of making it happen. And I think that story is a great highlight of, I was willing to start at the very bottom. I was willing to do the slow, small steps. And I think that now, if you look at where you're at, that helped drive to this level. And it's an interesting thing that I think my listeners will connect with, because they all want to get to the top. They all want to be great. They all want to achieve this, but you can't start at the top. You have to start at the very bottom.
Well, and I was able to replicate that a few more times in my life. I mean, once I decided to go out on my own and be a basketball performance coach, I was, able to work at Montrose Christian, which is a small private high school just north of Washington, D.C. It's where Kevin Durant graduated from. So they've had some really notable players, and they had a Hall of Fame caliber coach there. And I was basically their full-time performance coach. And for the first 4 years, I didn't get paid a dime. It was 100% volunteer work. Now, I still had rent to pay and food and all of that good stuff. So outside of my work for them, I was doing training on the side. Sounds very similar to the training that you're doing. So that was how I earned my living. But I was putting in 15 to 20 hours a week with them for free. But when I say free, I should say that with air quotes, it wasn't for free. I wasn't being compensated monetarily, but I was being compensated by learning, and I was being compensated through experience. And, I was learning everything I could from this Hall of Fame caliber coach. And I was getting to work with future NBA players when they were 14 and 15 years old. I mean, who could ask for a better lab to work on their craft if your goal is to become a basketball performance coach? So, I reaped tremendous value from that experience, although I wasn't paid monetarily. And the funny thing is, when I look back, had he even offered me a reasonable wage during those years, it wouldn't even have come close to the value that I got from the actual experience. Then when I decided to leave the basketball training space 4 years ago and try my hand at corporate keynote speaking, same thing. The first year as a corporate keynote speaker, probably close to half of my engagements were for free. But I did them because I wanted to get reps. I wanted to get experience. I wanted to be able to learn the nuances of the corporate world, since I had spent my entire life in the athletic world. And even to this day, doing something for free is certainly not beneath me. If I believe that the experience will enrich me, will teach me something, or if it's an opportunity for me to give back and offer value to someone that has helped me, then I jump at it all of the time. My agent hates whenever I say this, but for me, this stuff it's not about the money. Yes, there is a value on what I can bring to the world, and I want to be compensated for that because it allows me to provide for my family and have a lifestyle, if you will. But it's not about that. To me, it's about doing work that I love for people that I enjoy working with and trying to make a difference. And I'm a believer, similar to what I said earlier, if I do those things at a high level, the money will just follow. The money will just take care of itself. And you mentioned the person that said, well, if they'll pay me more, I'll do more. I would just say you might want to relook at that and take a different perspective and say, I'm going to start doing more. And then they'll have no option but to pay me more because they're going to want to keep me. I'm making such a massive contribution and I'm adding so much value that they'd be fools not to try to give me a raise just to hold on to me and keep me. So to me, that's kind of the difference between the mindset of earning versus entitlement. And I'm certainly not making a judgment on the person that you just shared. You shared a very small snapshot. But for me, I want to earn my value and then we'll be compensated appropriately instead of feeling like people owe me or I deserve this. Even to this day, I have a standard keynote fee that I charge for corporate organizations, but there are still times I make exceptions and I'll do something for less than that because it checks off one of these boxes. Is this a new audience that I'd like to earn some brand equity in? Is there something from this CEO that I could learn something from? Is this an organization that supported me previously and I want to do them a solid and give back to them out of goodwill and to strengthen a connection? And many times, if the answer to those things is yes, then I'm happy to do it for less than my standard full fee. And once again, I can see my agent shaking her head right now. What are you doing? But that's just kind of the code at which I live. I believe when you do these things, the money and the success or whatever, it's just going to find you. It's not something you have to chase.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that's a valuable answer for a lot of my people who are listening, because I work with a lot of high school age kids, college age kids, and they're hungry for the money. They're hungry for the success. They're hungry for these things, and it takes time. So, out of respect for your time, I could talk to you all day. I've enjoyed this conversation immensely, but what I want to do is give you an opportunity to leave my audience a place to connect with you, to find some of the stuff you're working on and to follow along on your journey. So if you want to do that now, that'd be great.
Sure. My main hub is just alansteinjr.com. I also have a one-off website, strongerteam.com, that has some additional resources that folks might find valuable. And I'm pretty easy to find on social media, just at Alan Stein Jr. I do my best to be as engaged as possible on social. So if anything in this conversation struck a chord, you found helpful, or even something you respectfully disagree with, just shoot me a line on social or drop me an email. Would love to continue the discussion. And yeah, just want to be of service. I mean, I'm trying to take all of these things that I've learned, whether I learned them from Kobe Bryant and Kevin Durant and Chris Paul, or I learned them from Byron Katie and Eckhart Tolle and Peter Crone. I'm trying to take all of these things and form a perspective and philosophy on life that not only serves me and my family, but adds value to others. And if it's doing that, then I feel great about what I'm doing. And love opportunities like this. I must say you are a brilliant host, a brilliant interviewer, a brilliant active listener, and really made this enjoyable and a lot of fun. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate the kind words. As always, guys, keep reaching for the stars, fall flat on your face. But remember, whenever we fall, always get up. Thank you for joining us today on the Edge of Greatness podcast. If you haven't yet, please take a minute now to subscribe and review our show. Join us again next week as we continue to dig deeper into the key components of greatness. The path to greatness is never linear, so remember to keep pursuing greatness no matter what. Keep stretching your abilities, reach for the stars, and fall flat on your face. But remember, no matter what happens, whenever we fall, always get up. Until next time, I'm Charles Schultz, and this was the Edge of Greatness podcast.